A girl without choices, Emma Rose. Bennett stood in the dusty yard of her uncle's failing farm, her worn boots planted in dirt that seemed to mirror her life, dry, cracked, and offering nothing good. At 17, she should have been planning a future, dreaming of love, imagining a life of her own choosing. Instead, she was standing beside a stranger while her uncle counted. Dirty money with hands that shook, from too much whiskey and too little conscience. The autumn wind of 1876 carried the scent of dying. Leaves and distant wood smoke across the Montana Territory. Emma kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, refusing to look at either man. Her auburn hair, braided tightly down her back, caught the afternoon light, and her green eyes remained dry despite the storm raging inside her chest. She had learned long ago that tears were a waste of water in a desert of indifference. She's strong. Works hard, don't eat much, her Uncle Samuel was saying, his voice carrying the practiced tone of a man selling livestock. Clean, too. Knows her way around a kitchen and a garden. Ain't been touched by any man, I can promise you that. Emma's jaw tightened. She wanted to scream, to run, to disappear into the mountains that rose like silent witnesses in the distance. But where would she go? She had no money, no family who cared, no skills beyond cooking and mending that could earn her passage to anywhere better than here. The stranger, Daniel James Morrison, stood with his hat in his hands, his weathered face unreadable. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair threaded with premature silver and gray eyes that looked like they had seen too much sorrow. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, maybe older. It was hard to tell with men who lived hard lives on the frontier. He wore clean but worn clothes, the kind that spoke of a man who had dignity but not wealth. "I ain't looking for a wife in the traditional sense," Daniel said quietly, his voice low and measured. "I need someone to help with my children and keep the house. My wife passed 2 years back, and the young ones, they need a woman's touch." Samuel spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Don't matter what you're looking for, long as you got the money we agreed on." $50 in that mare you rode in on. $50. That was Emma's worth. Less than a good horse, less than a winter's supply of grain. She was being sold like a piece of furniture, and no one had asked her opinion, sought her consent, or cared about her feelings. The weight of her powerlessness pressed down on her shoulders like an invisible yoke. The silent journey. The transaction was completed with a handshake Emma refused to witness. Daniel retrieved a worn leather bag from his saddlebag and handed it to her uncle along with the reins of a chestnut mare. Samuel counted the bills twice, grinning with yellowed teeth, then disappeared into his shack without a goodbye, without even a backward glance at the niece he had raised since she was 12. "Miss Bennett," Daniel said softly, and Emma flinched at the sound of her name in his voice. "I have a wagon just beyond those trees. I'd be obliged if you'd gather whatever belongings you have." She had almost nothing. A spare dress, a shawl her mother had knitted before the fever took her, a small wooden box containing a pressed flower, and a letter she could not read. She collected these items in less than 5 minutes and walked toward the waiting wagon without looking back at the only home she had known for 5 years. The wagon was simple but well-maintained, with a canvas cover stretched over curved wooden ribs. Inside, she could see supplies, flour sacks, tools, and a small space that had been cleared presumably for her. Daniel helped her up without touching her more than necessary, his hands steady but impersonal. They rode in silence for over an hour. The landscape rolled past in shades of gold and brown, the late afternoon sun painting everything in amber light. Emma sat rigidly on the wooden bench, her hands folded in her lap, her mind racing with questions she was too afraid to ask. What kind of man was he? What would he expect of her? Would he be cruel? Would he be kind? Would tonight be the night her innocence was taken by force? Payment for the $50 and a horse? Finally, as the sun began to sink toward the mountains, Daniel spoke. "My ranch is about another hour north. It ain't much, but it's solid. Good water, decent grazing. The house has 3 bedrooms. You'll have your own space." Emma glanced at him from the corner of her eye. His profile was stern but not unkind. There was something in the set of his jaw that spoke of sadness rather than cruelty. "My daughter Grace is 8, he continued, his voice softening slightly. "She don't talk much since her mama passed. My son Thomas is 5. He's quiet too, but he watches everything. They're good children. Just hurting. Emma found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. What happened to your wife? Daniel's hands tightened on the reins. Fever. Came on fast. She was gone in 3 days. He paused, swallowing hard. I couldn't save her. Couldn't do nothing but watch her slip away. The pain in his voice was real, raw, and recent. Emma felt something shift inside her, a tiny crack in the wall of fear she had built. This man was not a monster. He was broken, just like she was. The wedding that wasn't. They arrived at the ranch just as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and deep blue. The house was a simple 2-story structure, weathered but well kept, with smoke rising from the chimney. A barn stood nearby, and Emma could see a few horses in a corral, their shapes dark against the fading light. 2 small faces appeared in the window as the wagon pulled up. Daniel helped Emma down and the front door opened. A little girl with dark braids and solemn eyes stood in the doorway, holding the hand of an even smaller boy with the same serious expression. Grace? Thomas, Daniel said gently. This is Miss Emma. She's going to be staying with us, helping take care of you and the house. The children stared at her with the kind of assessment only young ones who had lost too much could manage. Emma tried to smile, but her face felt frozen. Inside, the house was clean but sparse. A fire burned in the hearth, and the smell of something cooking, beans maybe, filled the air. A neighbor woman, Martha Hayes, stood by the stove, wiping her hands on her apron. Reverend Cross is waiting in the parlor, Martha said quietly to Daniel. I'll stay with the children during the ceremony, then I'll be heading home. Ceremony. The word hit Emma like a stone. Of course, there would be a ceremony. Even in this wilderness, even in this transaction, there would be some pretense of legality, some binding of her fate to this stranger's. The wedding took less than 10 minutes. Reverend Cross read from his worn Bible, his voice echoing in the small room. Daniel repeated the vows in a flat, emotionless tone. When it was Emma's turn, she whispered the words, her voice barely audible. There was no ring, no kiss, no celebration. Just the scratch of a pen as she signed her name in the Reverend's record book, legally becoming Mrs. Daniel James Morrison. Martha left shortly after, giving Emma a sympathetic look that made her want to cry. The children were sent to bed, their confused eyes following Emma as they climbed the stairs. And then it was just the 2 of them standing in the kitchen as the fire crackled and the night pressed against the windows. The unexpected choice. Emma's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This was it. This was the moment she had been dreading. Daniel would take her upstairs, to his room, to his bed, and claim what he had paid for. She braced herself, tried to remember the whispered warnings other women had given her about wedding nights, about pain and duty and endurance, but Daniel did not move toward her. Instead, he walked to the kitchen table and pulled out a chair. Sit down, Emma. We need to talk. She sat, her body trembling, her hands clutching the edge of the table. Daniel sat across from her, his large hands flat on the scarred wood surface. He looked tired, older than his years, and deeply sad. I know what you must be thinking, he began, his gray eyes meeting hers directly. I know what you were probably told, what you're expecting, but I want you to understand something. I didn't bring you here for that. Emma blinked, confusion replacing some of her fear. I don't understand. Daniel took a deep breath. My children need a mother. This house needs a woman's care. I need help, practical help to keep this place running. But I ain't the kind of man who takes what ain't freely given. You're 17 years old. You didn't choose this. You didn't choose me. He stood and walked to the window, his back to her. Upstairs, the room at the end of the hall, that was my wife's sewing room. I've put a bed in there, clean linens, a lamp, that's your room. The door has a lock on the inside. You can use it whenever you want. Emma's mind was reeling. But what about, I'll sleep in the barn, Daniel said simply. Or on the couch down here when winter gets too cold. But I won't touch you, Emma. Not tonight, not ever, unless someday, a long time from now, You decide that you want that, and even then, it would be your choice, not mine to take. Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks before she could stop them. This was not what she expected. This was not what happened in the stories she had heard, the warnings she had been given. This man, this stranger who had bought her like property, was giving her something no one else ever had. A choice. "Why?" she whispered. Daniel turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw the reflection of his own pain. "Because someone took my wife from me without asking, without giving me a choice. Death just came and stole her away. I know what it feels like to be powerless. I won't do that to another person, especially not someone who's already lost so much." He walked to the stairs, pausing with his hand on the banister. "Your room is ready. There's water in the pitcher, and Grace's old nightgown is on the bed. It should fit you well enough. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the daily routine, what needs doing, how things work around here. But tonight, you just rest. You're safe here, Emma. I give you my word." And then he was gone, his footsteps fading as he walked out the back door toward the barn. Emma sat alone in the kitchen, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls, and for the first time since her uncle had announced her fate, she allowed herself to breathe freely. She climbed the stairs slowly, found the room exactly as he had described. It was small, but clean, with a window that looked out over the dark fields. The bed had been made with care, the blankets tucked in neatly. On the small table beside it, someone had left a single wildflower in a chipped cup. Emma locked the door, changed into the borrowed nightgown, and climbed into bed. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her, she realized that perhaps, just perhaps, her life had not ended today. Maybe, in the strangest way possible, it had just begun. The morning after, Emma woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and pale sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment she forgot where she was, then memory crashed back like cold water. She was married. She was in a stranger's house. She was now responsible for children she had never met and a life she had never imagined. She dressed quickly in her spare dress, braided her hair, and made her way downstairs. The house was quiet, but she could hear movement in the kitchen. When she entered, she found Daniel at the stove, awkwardly attempting to fry eggs while Thomas sat at the table, watching with the intensity of someone witnessing a disaster in progress. "Morning," Daniel said, not turning around. "I ain't much of a cook. Usually Martha comes by to help, but I figured you might want to, well, I didn't want to assume." Emma moved forward instinctively, years of caring for her uncle's household taking over. "Let me help." They worked side by side in careful silence, Daniel stepping back to give her space. The eggs were salvaged, bread was toasted, and soon a simple breakfast was laid out. Grace appeared, her dark eyes wary, her movements slow and cautious. She sat at the table without greeting anyone, her small hands folded in her lap. "Grace Thomas," Daniel said gently. "You remember Miss Emma from last night? She's going to be staying with us now, helping take care of you in the house." Thomas nodded solemnly. Grace said nothing, but her eyes tracked Emma's every movement with the wariness of a wild animal assessing a potential threat. They ate in silence, the scrape of forks against plates the only sound. Emma felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her. These children had lost their mother. They did not want a replacement. They did not want her. And she had no idea how to bridge the vast gulf of grief and suspicion that lay between them. After breakfast, Daniel showed her around the house, explaining the daily routines. Water needed to be hauled from the well. Laundry was done on Mondays. The chickens needed feeding twice a day. The garden, now mostly harvested for winter, still had root vegetables that needed tending. Bread was baked every other day. The children needed to practice their letters each afternoon. It was overwhelming, but Emma nodded and tried to remember everything. Daniel was patient, his voice steady, never condescending. Before he left to work on the ranch, he paused at the door. "If you need anything at all, ring the bell by the back door. I'll hear it." He hesitated, then added, "You did good this morning. Thank you." And then he was gone, leaving Emma alone with two children who looked at her like she was an intruder in their grief. Breaking through walls. The first week was hard. Grace barely spoke, responding to questions with one-word answers or silence. She moved through the house like a ghost, completing her chores mechanically, eating without appetite, and spending long hours staring out the window at nothing. Thomas was slightly more responsive, but his eyes held a sadness that no 5-year-old should carry. Emma did not push. She remembered her own grief after her parents died, how the well-meaning words of others had felt like sandpaper on an open wound. Instead, she simply showed up. She cooked meals, kept the house clean, tended the garden, fed the chickens. She read aloud from the Bible in the evenings, not because she was particularly religious, but because the rhythmic words filled the silence. She noticed small things. Grace liked her porridge with honey, not sugar. Thomas was afraid of the dark and needed a lamp left burning in his room. The children's clothes were mended but worn thin in places. Daniel worked from dawn until well past dusk. His face lined with exhaustion, but he never raised his voice, never showed impatience with his children's quiet sadness. Each night, Daniel returned to sleep in the barn, no matter how cold it got. Each morning, Emma found small signs of his consideration: firewood stacked by the back door, water buckets already filled, a torn seam in her dress mysteriously mended. He was keeping his promise, maintaining distance while showing care through action. On the 8th day, Emma baked cookies, something her mother had taught her. She shaped them like stars and animals and left them cooling on the table when the children came in from their afternoon chores. Thomas's eyes lit up and he reached for one immediately. Grace hesitated, her hand hovering over the plate, before finally taking a star-shaped cookie and biting into it carefully. "My mama used to make cookies," Grace said quietly. So quietly Emma almost missed it. It was the first unprompted sentence the girl had spoken to her. Emma's heart squeezed. "Did she? What kind did she like to make?" "Gingerbread. At Christmas." Grace's voice was small, fragile. "But she died before last Christmas came." Emma sat down at the table, her own hands folded to keep them from reaching out too soon. "I'm not trying to be your mama, Grace. No one could replace her. But I'm here, and I care about you. And if you ever want to make gingerbread together, I'd like that." Grace looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. Those dark eyes held oceans of pain, but also something else, a tiny flicker of possibility. She did not respond, but she did not turn away either. The fever, everything changed the night Grace fell ill. It started with a cough at dinner, then by bedtime the girl was burning with fever. Emma felt the heat radiating from the child's forehead and her stomach dropped. "Daniel!" she called, and he came running, taking the stairs 2 at a time. One look at his daughter's flushed face and his own went pale. "Not again," he whispered, the terror in his voice unmistakable. "Please God, not again!" But Emma was already moving. She had nursed her mother through fever, had tended her uncle through pneumonia. She knew what to do. "Get me cold water, lots of it. And clean cloths. Thomas, you go get Martha. Tell her we need willow bark if she has any." The night stretched into eternity. Emma sponged Grace's burning skin, forced water between her cracked lips, held her when she cried out in delirium. Daniel paced the room like a caged animal, his hands clenched, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. "You should rest," Emma told him gently. "I'll watch her." "I can't," he said hoarsely. "I lost my wife this way. I can't lose my daughter, too." "You won't," Emma said with a conviction she did not entirely feel. "I won't let that happen." As the night deepened, Grace's fever climbed higher. She began to thrash, calling out for her mother in a voice that broke Emma's heart. Without thinking, Emma climbed into the bed beside her, gathering the child into her arms, rocking her gently. "Shh, sweetheart. I'm here. You're safe. I've got you." "Mama?" Grace whispered, her eyes unfocused, her small hand clutching at Emma's sleeve. Emma's throat tightened. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here," she sang then. Old songs her own mother had sung, lullabies in a language half-remembered. She sang until her voice was hoarse, until her arms ached, until finally, as dawn broke pink and gold over the mountains, Grace's fever began to break. The child's breathing eased. Her skin cooled. She fell into a deep, natural sleep, her fingers still wrapped around Emma's. Daniel, standing by the window, turned to look at them, and Emma saw tears streaming down his face. "You saved her," he said, his voice breaking. "You saved my little girl." Emma shook her head tiredly. "She's strong." She fought. But when Grace woke hours later, fever gone and eyes clear, the first thing she did was wrap her arms around Emma's neck and whisper, "Thank you, Mama Emma." The word hung in the air. Mama. Not a replacement, but a new beginning. Emma held the child close, her own tears falling freely, and felt something she had not felt in 5 years, like she belonged somewhere. The truth revealed. That evening, after the children were asleep and Emma was sitting by the fire, mending one of Thomas's shirts, Daniel came in from the barn earlier than usual. He sat in the chair across from her, his hands clasped between his knees, his face troubled. "I need to tell you something," he began. "Something I should have said from the start." Emma set down her mending, giving him her full attention. Daniel took a deep breath, his gray eyes meeting hers. "When I married you, I told myself it was just practical, that I needed help, and you needed a home, and that was all there was to it. But that wasn't the whole truth." He stood, pacing to the window, his shoulders tense. "My wife, Clara, she was my whole world. When she died, I thought I died too. I went through the motions, took care of the kids, kept the ranch running, but I was empty inside. I figured I'd just stay that way until the day I joined her." Emma remained silent, sensing he needed to say this without interruption. "But then I heard about you, about your situation. Martha told me what your uncle was like, how he treated you, and something in me, some part that I thought was dead, it woke up. I thought, maybe I can't save Clara, but I can save this girl. I can give her a safe place, a life that ain't filled with cruelty." He turned to face her. "I didn't want a wife, Emma. I wanted to do one good thing in a world that had taken everything from me. But what I didn't expect was—" He trailed off, struggling with the words. Emma stood, crossing the room to stand before him. "Was what?" "Was you," he finished quietly. "I didn't expect you to be so kind, so patient with my children, so strong. I didn't expect that watching you braid Grace's hair or teach Thomas his letters would make this empty house feel like a home again. I didn't expect to care about whether you smiled or not." Emma's heart was racing. "Daniel, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I'm still keeping my promise. Your choice, always your choice. But I needed you to know that you ain't just the help. You're important. To me, to the kids. You matter." Emma reached out and, for the first time, took his hand. It was calloused and rough, but warm and steady. "I was so scared when I came here. Scared of you. Scared of this life. Scared I'd just be traded from one prison to another. But you gave me something no one else ever has. Respect. Kindness. A choice." She squeezed his hand gently. "I'm not that frightened girl anymore, Daniel. These past weeks, watching you with your children, seeing how hard you work, how much you care, I've come to understand something." "What's that?" "That maybe I got luckier than I ever dreamed possible." She smiled, and it was real, genuine, reaching her eyes for the first time in years. "I'm not ready for everything yet, but I'm ready to stop being afraid. I'm ready to be part of this family, not just the woman who cooks and cleans, but really part of it." Daniel's eyes glistened. "You already are, Emma. From the moment Grace called you Mama, from the moment Thomas started smiling again, from the moment I realized I was rushing home at night just to see your face, you've been family." They stood together in the firelight, hands clasped. Two broken people who had found healing in the last place they expected. Outside, the Montana night was cold and vast. But inside, the house that had been filled with grief was slowly, carefully, filling with something new, hope, trust, and the fragile, beautiful beginning of love. Grace appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mama Emma? Papa? Are you fighting?" Emma and Daniel looked at each other and smiled. "No, sweetheart," Emma called up gently. "We're not fighting. Come down here." The little girl descended the stairs, Thomas appearing behind her, equally curious. Daniel scooped them both up, one in each arm, and carried them to the couch. Emma sat beside them, and together the four of them sat in a huddle, the fire casting warm light over their faces. "Things are going to be different now," Daniel said softly. "Better. We're going to be a real family." Thomas looked at Emma with his serious 5-year-old eyes. "Does that mean you'll stay forever?" Emma looked at Daniel, at Grace, at Thomas, and felt her heart swell with emotion she had thought lost forever. "Yes," she whispered. "Forever." And in that moment, in a small house on the Montana frontier, 4 people who had each lost everything found something precious: each other. The road ahead would not be easy. Healing never is, but together, with patience and care and the kind of love that grows slowly from respect and trust, they would build something worth fighting for: a family, a home, a future. And that night, for the first time since arriving, Emma Rose Morrison went to sleep not as a girl who had been sold, but as a woman who had chosen her life. And in the morning, when she woke to the sound of children laughing and the smell of coffee brewing, she knew she was finally, truly home.